All right, we are live here at Myth Vision Podcast. We just wanted to jump on for 10 seconds to let you know that Jesus did not rise from the dead. Have a nice day, and that's the end of the show. Hope you guys enjoyed. See ya.
That was fun.
Bye. Welcome to Myth Vision Podcast. We're going to have a hangout today. We'll spend 60 minutes, I'll say. Literally taking, of course, questions from the audience, but also hanging out and getting to jab what issues have come up, how you guys are dealing with some of the apologetics out there, arguments that seem convincing to you. One of the interesting things Paulogia has brought to my attention about a year ago was like, let's pay attention to Paul's mental faculties. I mean, we can't really psychoanalyze him, but if you're going to play in the Christian sandbox, you need to try and like see what alternative positions make the most sense. So that being said, real quick, everybody go subscribe. I pinned the comment up there. Theological, Derek Bennett. He spells his name the right way. Mine is not spelled the right way. So that means he deserves your subscription to go and hit that bell and go harass him, especially if you're a Christian. You're not going to like some of the stuff he says. So go tell him what you know he's wrong about. Also, please. Gnostic Informant. Gnostic's like a sister channel, brother channel. Like literally, he's doing very similar things to what I do, but he's read areas I haven't. He explores things I haven't. And now he's talking to scholars I haven't. So eventually I'll have to catch up to him. Go subscribe to his channel. And then, of course, Paulogia. He has a massive YouTube channel, of course, over here. And another one most people don't know about, only the secret initiates. And it's called Paulogia Live.
Nice.
Yeah, you kind of have to, like, is this where you don't speak in parables over here, right? It's only
That's right. We have the secret meanings.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the Gnostic. It's the Gnostic channel.
Yeah. It's the deep esoteric circle.
Right.
Hallelujah. Well, I've been over there, but I don't want to talk about the contents over there because nobody has tithed enough to hear about it.
We even talk about Bruno over there.
Ooh. You have a live coming up actually too. When is that, tonight?
Thursday.
Thursday. Yeah. Okay.
William Lane Craig on Disney for some reason. Like the dude needs to pick a lane. He's turning into the Christianity's version of Richard Dawkins. Like he's just all over the map now.
Wow. Nice.
Wow. Well, look, go subscribe. If you don't know Paul, well, you don't know YouTube. So also I have the Patreon, tons of content, early release. This is Yoda and the Buddha. We go into Manichaeism and its influence on Star Wars religion, literally the Force religion. And we just talk about the Silk Road, the historical situation where Buddhism and Christianity clash and create what we call Manichaeism. Deep dive there. I just did one on Paul. Really contradicts Luke, John. We'll probably get into that somewhat today. Anyway, go support us there. That's all I got. All right, guys. So where do we want to begin? I invited Paul on and I said, Paul, let's talk about Paul. Okay, not you, but the Apostle Paul. And being he's the only person that wrote anything in the New Testament who claims to have had a vision of the appearance of Jesus. Take us into how you would approach this subject.
Well, I think you came to me after I posted a recent video regarding hallucinations, which was two medical doctors who Sean McDowell was interviewing, who in their practices have dealt with people who have hallucinations and therefore felt comfortable to talk about hallucinations in general. It was an incredibly ridiculous premise of the show because it was basically trying to say, if the Bible was 100% true,
I saw it.
Would hallucinations make sense? It's like, well, no, that wouldn't make sense because the Bible is true and therefore they really saw the person. So, but in that interview, they actually said some great things from the medical perspective regarding some of the things that we know cause hallucinations. And of course, a huge one that is incredibly common is grief. Grief amongst not only spouses, that's the most common, but grief amongst people you spend a lot of time with and mentors and religious figures, right? So, grief for those things tend to cause hallucinations. Another thing they spoke of was, and it relates to Paul, in my opinion, is the idea of guilt-induced post-traumatic stress. Now, we don't know to what extent Paul was persecuting Christians. That it's not super laid out very well, but a lot of the speculation is that Paul was either killing Christians or standing by as Christians were killed. And, I think if you're the kind of person who's, for religious reasons, having other people put to death, there's definitely a candidate there for you to sort of feel like, oh, I'm starting to feel bad about this, right? Like this is a thing that maybe, again, we're just speculating,
right?
But it is a common thing that causes visions, and I think everyone on this panel would affirm, and I think even if we brought a lot of Christians in, we would affirm that what Paul saw was visions, right? These are not. I don't know too many Christians who affirm that Jesus had a second coming in 36 AD and was literally bodily wandering around to talk to Paul.
Not only that, I'm pretty sure, I don't have it in front of me, I haven't looked at it recently, but I'm pretty sure that the people who Paul was with didn't see Jesus either.
Well, that depends on which chapter in Acts you read.
Okay. 9, 22, or 26. Which one is it? They definitely don't agree.
So in one of them they heard nothing. In one of them they saw nothing. And the third one is that they saw, and they neither saw nor heard anything, right? Is that correct?
All right. But if you take those three, I think there's enough there to say that there was definitely a disconnect between what they saw and what Paul saw, whether it's heard or saw or whatever.
Right.
Definitely, there's definitely they didn't see the same thing. Is what I'm getting at.
And of course, Paul never describes Damascus Road at all. So, do we take what Acts says? I like to sometimes grant it for the sake of it, but I'm not totally convinced. Like Paul was dead long before Acts was written.
Right.
So
it looks like Acts 26 has. So Acts 26 has all of them like see, and it seems even possibly hear. It doesn't specify the hearing part, but like all the companions, he says about noon, King Agrippa, verse 13, 26 in Acts, chapter 26 in Acts. King Agrippa, as I was on the road, I saw a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, blazing around me and my companions. We all fell to the ground. And I heard a voice saying to me, so maybe one can try to like argue, oh, they didn't see or hear anything. Why are they falling to the ground, though, in this account? So anyway.
Well, another thing about that is when would King Agrippa, who's like the second highest in the Roman Empire next to, I don't know, the Caesar, when would he be just like randomly just out of his day just going to see Paul? Like there's some random guy who's like just getting into trouble and they're going to put him in front of Agrippa for a court case. Like what, does this sound historical? To me, it doesn't. I don't know, but just doesn't sound right. You know what I mean?
Acts is suspect.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Well, as a comparative religions guy, what has to be said is just how common this kind of motif was in the ancient world. I can read a few of these off to you real quick. Just examples. Romulus, after being immortalized and translated to heaven, appeared to Proculus Julius and delivered a great commission for Rome. Asclepius, who was immortalized after death, appeared to Greeks and barbarians alike, including Maximus of Tyre, who wrote a first-hand account. Antiochus of Agae, the mother of a sickened man near Memphis. Aristaeus, after having died in a fuller's shop, appeared alive again to a man on the road to Cyzicus, as well as to many abroad. The only reason we're talking about Paul is because Christianity became the predominant religion here in the West. If it hadn't, we might be discussing one of these other tales, one of these other motifs, and whether or not that was a hallucination or something veridical. Christianity gets special treatment because it's the religion that persisted to this day. But this was common in antiquity. I mean, lots of people saw things just like this.
Ovid tells us that Julius Caesar was taken up by Venus when he was cremated and put on the throne in heaven, and Augustus became the son of God because of the adoption and the will, and he styled himself as that. I mean, it's like, this is just normal shit back then. People just say,
like less than anyone in the audience thinks that we're trying to say that these things inspired Jesus. Not necessarily. That's not what we're saying. No. What we're saying is like, man, this is how business was done. Like even up until the 4th century, you have Constantine, who was going into battles and having his battle strategy based on like visions, right? So, and the army just went, the generals just went with it. Now, of course, he had some authority to do something about it, but this was a common justification at the time for whatever. That's, I think, that's all we're saying as a panel, right?
I agree 100%.
Yeah, no, I mean, none of us are saying, and I'm not saying there isn't possible correlations to things around, but we're not dogmatic even then. And we really are open-minded to looking for the puzzle pieces of what is in the zeitgeist, what is in the air in the Greco-Roman world that would have been possibly influential. And this is stuff that I think gets ignored. And even when it gets like looked at, it gets brushed aside, or you have church fathers who make excuses. Well, you know, it was Satan. He knew beforehand, so he made it look like this and stuff. There's a reason they all look very similar in many respects. Not identical, but very similar. And that's one thing I think is interesting. I'll make one comment. We got a bunch of super chats we can get to too. Let's let the audience maybe throw at us some ideas. But one thing I wanted to maybe get your guys' comments on is I was thinking that when Paul's group account, right, what we hear about in 1 Corinthians 15, if we grant that account, he appeared to this, he appeared to 12, he appeared to Cephas, he appeared to James, he appeared 500, whatever, taking into Constantine's account of these visions, you kind of wonder, is this kind of a Fatima type thing? Like, are they looking and seeing something in heaven or in the sky or a bright light, unexplained phenomena that it just doesn't understand, that they experienced, and they're interpreting it through their zeitgeist? So I'm writing this article now, and I thought when Paul talks in 2 Corinthians 12 about his third heaven experience, and I'm not going to boast or anything, but, you know, I once knew a man, this guy right here, like, that's literally how he sounds if you read it carefully. He's like, I'm not trying to boast, but I must brag about this one. And I kind of wonder, speculation, is this his conversion experience? Don't know. He's taken up to heaven. He sees things he can't describe. A guy eating a fish sandwich telling you to touch his hands and his side. That sounds describable. And in fact, it is described in the Gospels. That doesn't seem like what Paul sees. Paul sees something completely different, preferably glory, bright light. Makes me think of Fatima. Makes me think of Constantine's symbol or sign that he somehow is seeing bright lights. What the heck is going on? And in those days, apotheosis, where humans are deified, they became stars. In the Hebrew world, they angelified them, if you will, or angelification, they call it, because they don't want to call them gods. In the Greco-Roman world, you just became a god. Now, most scholars say they don't become gods in the Jewish mind because monotheism. Others, like M. David Litwell, say, no. They believed you became deified. You became part of the pantheon, or with God, if you will. And I just say that to say, like, isn't Paul just taking natural phenomenon, religious experiences, and interpreting them through his own worldview? That's all it seems like he's doing.
Yeah.
Am I
and another thing
on the right path with you guys, or?
And I think another thing we should mention is the time period there was a lot of trauma going on. There's a lot of shit happening, a lot of things that could be leading to people having, you know, traumatic experiences, which could lead to, I'm going to try to psychoanalyze everything in the past, but just throwing it out there that it's possible people could be starting to lose it a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
I like to look in this case at, you know, Galatians 1, when he says a couple things. Specifically, one of them is, you know, that I want you to know, brothers, that the gospel I'm passing on to you is what I received from a vision, right? Like and he also goes on to say, when he says these men added nothing to my message, I know that's always said, oh, they were affirming. They said, hey, let's pat on the back. Like, but to me, that phrase has always been like, I went and talked to Peter. I wasn't impressed. They didn't add a thing to my message.
Right. What is the deal? I know what the deal is. It's let's protect our bubble. Let's keep our empire alive.
Right.
You know, Hector Avalos wrote that. I'm purchasing 4 of his books. He's dead now from cancer, but he's big on this, like the empire of Christian scholarship on the New Testament. Let's just call a spade a spade. It looks like what it is, and it's a problem. So Ted Francis says, did Paul think Jesus was coming back soon?
Yes. Yeah. What is it he says there in First Thessalonians 4?
We who remain and are alive at his coming, and I think he includes himself in that we. So Paul's thinking he is going to go and be transformed, which gets into the resurrection.
Yeah.
This book right here, if you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. James Tabor takes a deep dive. He points out, as other scholars, Paul's resurrection is contradictory to what we find in Luke and John. A bodily flesh and bone Jesus is not on, it's not on the menu in Paul at all.
No, he specifically says flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor can the perishable inherit the imperishable. Now, scholars like William Lane Craig, if I may call him a scholar, they try to manipulate and twist this and say N.T. Wright does the same thing. Well, he doesn't mean literal flesh and blood here, because they need to harmonize what Paul is saying with what the gospel, what Luke and John are saying. And it doesn't work. What they try to do is say that Paul is using synecdoche, the phrase flesh and blood, which is where a part or parts stand for the whole, right? And that's actually true. It is synecdoche. But the whole point of synecdoche is that what's true of the whole must be true of the part, right? Like if someone says all hands on deck, that's the same kind of thing. It doesn't mean that your hands by themselves come scurrying up to the deck. It means your whole body, right? But in bringing your whole body, do you not bring your hands along with you? He's saying flesh and blood because he's referring to a corporeal, fleshly body that gets old, gets sick, rots, and decays, and that's not going to make the trek for eternity in heaven. It's got to be something different. So, yes, he does mean when he says flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, that it's not a fleshly body, as opposed to what Luke and John are saying.
Mm. Did you want to comment on the Jesus coming back thing, Paul, or no?
No, I'm good.
You already know.
I think we all just yes.
Yeah, we all agree. Okay, I'll make these quicker then. Robert Herring, thanks for the support, my friend. Shannon is in the chat. Watch out, everybody. She will get you. You better watch out. Seriously, thanks for showing up and letting us take your man for 60 minutes. Melody Joy, did Paul believe Jesus was coming soon for the first time? Okay.
Interesting.
This is I think, if I'm not mistaken, wouldn't this be like the mythicist approach?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. And I personally don't think so.
Yeah.
But I love you, Melody.
Yeah.
You're a great supporter.
Yeah, I'm definitely not. I think that just like the Essene Qumran, if you will, community, they had a teacher of righteousness who died, and they predicted he'd come back in 40 years. Like legit. This is in Dead Sea Scroll literature. This is 100-something years before Jesus. Why are they saying it about a Jewish guy in the desert that they're, at this little community? This guy's going to come back. He's dead, but they expected him to rise from the dead.
Yeah, I like what Gerd Ludemann said, that, Paul either didn't know much about Jesus or just didn't care much about his earthly life, but he knew of such a person. So, yeah, I mean, I'm in complete agreement with Ludemann on that.
Because you'd have to put all your weight at this point on that, the start of 1 Corinthians 15, where it's the brother of James is entirely, the brother in terms of the holy greeting versus familiar relation, but also that Paul, when he was describing the Last Supper, just you have to put a lot of weight on the fact that both of those things are entirely fictional, to say that he thought Jesus hadn't ever been on earth. Like, because even I think that a lot of mythicists would even say that, that what happened in the sky with Jesus was in the realm of earth, like, like they considered what was happening in the sky still part of Earth, right?
Or it's like a copy of what's on Earth. It's like a different
Yeah.
But it's the same. There's physical objects up
Right.
there as well and stuff. So
Another thing, real quick, before you get to the next one, in First Corinthians 15, he says something. He says, "Now Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep." Basically saying that people who have died after his first resurrection are just asleep for a little bit. He'll be back soon, and they'll be waking back up. Like,
Yeah.
just don't worry, guys, it's coming. Basically, is what he's getting at. So he
Yeah.
wouldn't have said it that way. The language wouldn't have been that way if he didn't come back already. If that makes sense.
Well, there were people who taught that the resurrection already happened. Their names were
They use that too.
yeah, Hymenaeus and Philetus. They're found in the New Testament, but they're probably Gnostics of some sort, what we call Gnostics. But John Jacob Jingle. I'm just kidding. John Jingle, thank you so much. It's impossible, Christian doctor.
No, it's possible.
Oh, it's possible.
Oh yeah. That was funny. Yeah,
Who said that?
That was in the video that I was kind of picking apart from Sean. He kept saying, well, yeah, that's possible, but that's not what the Bible said. Like, it's like, oh yeah, Paul could have had a PTS division, but it's
possible.
Or it's possible Peter had bereavement, but that's not what the Bible said. Like, it's like, well, okay.
Well,
Yeah.
and then he goes, because they're asking, McDowell was kind of trying to be fair, trying to be like, he's trying to be real about it. Well, is it possible that this could have? It's possible. And then he says, but if we are just to accept the Bible being true for what it is, then, like, wait, what? We're supposed to just accept it to be true for what it is off the bat without any questions?
Right.
That just, I don't know. It's just a horrible methodology.
They were fighting a question that no one was asking.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
That's an interesting point. That, like, it's not what the Bible says, but don't, like, many apologists like to take the point of when the spear pierces the side, they want to go and do some anatomy stuff to find out, well, that's where water's located within the human. It's like, the Bible doesn't say these details that you're trying to figure out. Why are you doing all this extra? It's not written there clearly in the text or something. They're always they're willing to do that. But when we're starting to psychoanalyze or try to say what other possible explanation, you're not allowed to do that. Not supposed to do that. Paul, you big no. You are a big no on YouTube. Let's just put it that way. Crawford Fulton King, good to see you here, my friend. Looks like some learning for me tonight. Luke and Acts were my main indoctrination. Sorry, education biblically as a youngster. Yeah.
That's actually interesting. I rarely, when you say, what's your favorite gospel? I rarely hear anyone say Luke.
Usually it's John.
It's usually John. Some people really like the brevity of Mark.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, for Luke and Acts to be your go-tos, that's interesting.
Yeah, I love the stories that you find within the narratives of Acts. I mean, that was pretty cool, but
Mark is straight to the point.
Mm-hmm.
The billboards on my drive from Kentucky back home to where I'm from in Indiana usually refer me to Matthew. So a lot of those here in the old South.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's here in North Carolina
because Matthew is the most Jewish friendly.
I know,
and that state isn't. Is it?
I'm torn. I'm torn between Matthew being so Jewish friendly, guys. I really am. And I've got a scholar coming on soon. She's going to talk about the Stoicism in Matthew, but Matthew constantly points to the Gentile mission. And there are some scholars, we talk to Delcy Allison Jr. all the time. I've got his commentaries over there on the shelf. And he said, I didn't want to find the things you're describing, Derek, because I just don't want to see them if they're there. He admits his bias. Like, he tells me when he does not want to look for something.
Right.
He's very honest about that. And I said, are there places where God is done with Israel? Like, he did everything he could. We had a mission. We went to the Jews. They didn't accept it. Like, the few that did, okay, we're done. Now we're moving on to the nations. We're over with Israel, like a divorce. And there are some scholars who think that's what Matthew's up to, especially when Jesus himself hints when the centurion comes up and he says, out of all of Israel, to a Roman centurion, you have better faith than anyone who's in Israel. All these compliments to the Gentiles that show up, there is one negative one where it's like, hey, don't go to the Gentiles, don't go to the Samaritans, rather go only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But that mission ends.
Right.
Then it's Great Commission.
Matthew's trying to be the most Jewish of the other one. It's like when you see the Jews or the Jews for Jesus people, That's like how Matthew was. Like Matthew is like trying to be the most Jewish, and Matthew itself is a priestly name, Matthias. Well, whereas Mark and Luke are just Roman names. Like
Yeah,
so,
but Matthew didn't write Matthew, probably.
Yeah,
obviously that's what
that name wasn't attached at the time of writing. So
well, that's what I'm saying. It's trying to be the most Jewish, but it also does have that layer of anti-Semitism, big time. I think.
Derek.
Uh-oh.
Rose.
It's definitely the Kentucky internet over there. Moving on, DBR. Thank you for the super sticker, my friend. Just making sure I didn't miss a comment.
Look at Derek right now.
He'll come right back if it happens. It happens. Doc Pleroma not in the house. Oh, get ready, guys. Visions on the imposter substitution hypothesis might have legs with later mistaken identification with Thomas Didymus or mistaking Jesus for Simon of Cyrene. If you read the him ambiguity in Mark 15:21-24. So this is the idea that Simon helps Jesus carry the cross and then ends up on the cross. And there is later gospels that we find in Nag Hammadi literature where it's like, oh snap. And Jesus is laughing on the side. Literally, one of the texts has Jesus laughing.
Like literally like Life of Brian.
Like Life of Brian. I'm not making this up. There's real literature.
Muslims later, I know the Shia 12ers adopted this as they think that he put someone else up on the cross. Some say it was Judas. They even changed it up a bit.
I think there's multiple pieces of literature. That's why I love interviewing all these scholars. And M. David Litwa, he's like, oh, there's like 4 papyri that say this, and there's 2 papyri that say that. And I'm like, this is awesome. So I'll read that real quick. Mark 15:21-24. And they compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. And they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it.
It is random.
Verse 24. And they crucified him and divided his garments among them, casting lots for them to decide what each should take. So he's mentioning, might have the identification, if you read the him ambiguity. So here you have compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. Then you kind of wonder, and they brought him, is it talking about Simon of Cyrene here? This is what I think he's trying to say. And they brought him, Simon of Cyrene, to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. And they offered him, Simon of Cyrene, wine mixed with myrrh. I mean, like, you kind of wonder,
that's
right?
Deep. That's some deep, right? That's some deep shit.
Yeah, I would want to study the Greek there because I feel like that's an artifact of, in English, we have the pronoun always relates to the last stated subject, but that might not be Greek grammar.
Right.
Yeah, this is above my head. I'm not a Greek guy.
I will say this, though. I agree with what you just said, Paulogia, but I will say this, though. It is kind of random that in the middle of this passage, oh, by the way, some guy named Simon of Cyrene just jumps in the narrative and helps out Jesus carrying a cross. Like, why did that have to happen? You know what I mean? Like, that's as far as I'll go with it.
But you did make me now wonder, like, so when I was a Christian, Life of Brian was just like the most heretical thing could exist, right? So I watched part of it as a Christian and never all of it. And so since I've left, I've watched it several times, but are there good documentaries on like what Terry Gilliam and John Cleese and those guys, like how much research did they put into? Because it sure sounds like they've put some of those conspiracy theories into Life of Brian.
And you're right. And because there's they actually talk about Jesus' father being a Roman soldier, which is found in Celsus and the Talmud. So they were going deep into research.
Like, you remember when Brian walks in to his mother's house, and then the Roman soldier comes in. You could tell he was banging his mom. Yeah. Okay. Well, that whole story right there is this jab that we see possibly a hint at in John. I believe it's in Gospel of John, where it says, we know it, we are not like you, born from adultery, or something like that. And it's like, born from adultery, Jesus, why would someone say that? Now, one could argue that this is before the idea and the hypothesis of Panthera, but the idea that, son of the panther, the idea that the Roman centurion slept with Mary. But it is for sure a story that ends up happening in the Tosefta,
right,
and later on in Celsus, like one of the
and of course in Mark they always call Jesus, the humans call Jesus the son of Mary, never the son of Joseph.
Red flag. Yeah.
So,
but they did do the research, I think.
right.
Wow. So is there a documentary with these guys now? I need to find this after we're done. But
that's a good question, because they definitely did some digging. That's for sure.
I don't know, but I love that. I went in person and got that question of yours to Del C. Allison Jr. I used multiple clips in the intro from Life of Brian. I always enjoy that movie. All right, couple more here. My favorite Canadian, just under Neil and Shannon. How do we know?
All right.
But how do we know that the Gospels are not written by the names on the label, and why the Christians are not addressing this accordingly?
Who wants to answer that? Does someone want to jump in before me?
You could jump in.
So we don't know, but we strongly suspect, because the first time those names appear are around 180 AD, whereas the early church fathers were quoting from these Gospels for a good 80 years before that. And they would, when they were quoting from things like the letters, they would say, this is from the letter to Galatians. They would specifically use the names of the authors of the letters they were quoting. But when they were quoting the Gospels, they're completely silent on which book they're quoting up until about 180 AD, when it sure looks like what happened there was, that someone just needed to start a tradition. The other part of it is that our earliest reports from Papias for both Matthew and Mark, when he talks about Matthew, he says that the book was written in Hebrew and that it was a list of sayings. Now, Matthew was Greek, clearly written in Greek, and was not a list of sayings. So whatever Papias was describing wasn't what we call Matthew.
Right.
And the same thing with Mark. His one thing says about Mark, that it was derived from the testimony of Peter, and that absolutely nothing was left out. Where suddenly we have Mark being completely the shortest. We talked about this already. It's the shortest, most briefest book. It sure doesn't seem like the one where nothing is left out.
Yeah.
So again, we just don't know. There may have been a Gospel of Mark and a Gospel of Matthew that were circulating at the time, but not the books that we're using under those names, right?
Right.
So it just seems sus.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it makes you wonder if they're talking about Q, but then he says it's Hebrew. And I don't know if Q is supposed to be in Hebrew.
And you'd think Q would be in Aramaic, since that's what Jesus spoke.
Sure.
Right?
True.
You would think, but God preserved his word pretty well here, it seems. I'm just teasing. Gray's 174. The post-death visions back then tended not to lead people to believe in bodily resurrection. Objection is non-trivial for me to work out. Thoughts?
Again, I'll jump in if no one wants to, but I'll let someone else go first, since I say so many words.
Yeah, you could jump in.
The idea here is that, again, it goes back to the video I made about Sean, and I hear it all the time. Well, it can't have been a hallucination because no one changes their beliefs because of a hallucination. And that's like, again, I think that's also trivial. It's like, of course we do. Of course people do. People suffer hallucinations and change what they believe all the time. It doesn't. And how would you test that? How would you know, right, that someone's decision making was not based on that? So again, I agree with the person writing. It was
Grace.
That that's a stupid objection, because there's no way you could tell, right?
If I might add to this just briefly to make a point, I don't think Paul has a bodily resurrection in mind. So to attribute his vision of Christ with bodily resurrection, I don't see it. I mean, that doesn't mean he didn't think he had some form of a body. So when you say bodily, I'm defining that as physical, and it could be something else. But just to make the point, little echo, there we go. Derek's back. Just to make the point, though, on this whole thing, I think that Luke and John want you to think it's physical, because they're probably arguing against people we call docetics. We also see this in like 1 John, like 1 John, where it's like, oh, we saw him, we touched him, and we saw, behold his glory. We know he's like physical. They want you to know that because there were Christians that were starting in the 2nd century to say, hey, Jesus was so divine. We can't imagine him with Middle Platonism in mind. We can't imagine our Lord having that icky stuff we call flesh. That's why 1 John says, he who says he hasn't come in the flesh is like an antichrist. So here you have John and Luke saying stuff like he has a body, a physical touch me body, because they want to combat what appears to be docetism or something like it. Anyway, there's my 2 cents. I don't know if I took your question and went somewhere else. I don't know if Paul was hitting.
Actually, no, I think you answered it better than I did. You up there answered better than I did. So.
I'd say what I'm about to say might take it. Is my mic on? Oh, it's on. Okay. This might be a little bit.
Can you guys
off.
hear Neil? I'm just kidding, Neil. Good.
This might be a little bit off what the person's asking for, but I think it's related. But what I don't think makes sense about the bodily resurrection is that when you get people who die, for example, you get the rich man and the Lazarus parable, and he's in a place, he's in hell or whatever, and there's the bosom of Abraham is above him, and he's begging for a drop of water. He's somewhere, and he's conscious, but he's not in his body. His body didn't get resurrected, right? His body's dead in a grave somewhere on earth. And like, so when you die, do you actually go to hell right away, or are you gone and you're not conscious and you're waiting? Paul talks about in one of his epistles, I think it's Corinthians, where he says it's going to be in the flash of an instant. We're just going to be raised up into the clouds, and heaven on earth is going to be. It's just kind of like it's a flash instant, like you're dead. You don't know you're dead, and you're not conscious. Then you're raised up in the bodily.
What's your reference on that?
On which verse that is?
Yeah.
I think that's 1 Corinthians 15.
Yeah, because that's at the end resurrection. So I mean, Paul, not right. Well, let's turn this into pugilism combat now.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because doesn't that defeat the purpose of dying and going to heaven or hell? Because aren't you waiting for?
Well, so this is a huge schism between, of course, Catholicism and Protestantism. And you know, I was a Protestant. I'm a Protestant atheist. So there's the verse, and I can't remember the reference, but to be out of the body is to be with the Lord, right? Essentially for believers. And we always pointed to that to say that essentially we don't know if people are in heaven, but as soon as they die, you're with the Lord in some sense. But we're all waiting for new heaven to be on this earth, right? Like God is replacing this earth with new heaven. So, and we know that time doesn't necessarily make sense outside of it, but that don't worry, the people aren't in hell and they're not in purgatory. They are with the Lord in some sense, but we're all waiting for our heavenly bodies to happen all at once on that day. Like in 1 Corinthians 15, it talks about how those who are dead get their bodies first. Mm-hmm. And then those who are still alive get their bodies next.
It's a transformation,
right?
So it's really weird, the language Paul uses. But one thing you brought up about Lazarus, just to bring up that you showed earlier, is there is a Greek myth where who was it that begs Asclepius?
Artemis. Hippolytus gets killed. He gets mangled by a what do you call a chariot? He's in a chariot, and he falls off the chariot. He gets mangled. His body's all bloody and mangled. He's dead. Artemis is in love with him. Asclepius is nearby, and she begs him to revive him, and he brings him back to life.
Resuscitation, though, like Lazarus, not transformation.
Resurrects him.
Right.
He was dead. And then Zeus was pissed about it.
Now, we know that's real. We know that really happened, though. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I don't want you guys to... Don't conflate the two Lazaruses, because there's two Lazaruses. Is that where you're going, Derek?
No. I was just simply trying to say that Lazarus's resurrection was a resuscitation, and we find those also in Greek myths right there, contemporaneous to the Gospels. So
I see what you're saying, but to go back to what I was getting at, it almost doesn't seem like what's the point of having a bodily resurrection when we can be in with heaven, we can be in another avatar somewhere else in another realm. It just doesn't. It's just weird. I get what you're saying. Paulogia answered that perfectly. Like that made sense. But
Well,
I just don't see.
I'm quoting the
No,
mythology.
biblical perspective.
It's an internal. The internal.
If you were a pastor, I would have been like, "Oh, good answer."
Yeah,
That would have
right.
made sense. But it also still is like, what's the point, though? You know what I mean?
Are we
all need
talking
something
about
to
the
rule. Go ahead.
Are we
Sorry,
talking
Derek.
about the apologetic where they say that no one in the ancient world believed in bodily resurrection or immortalization, which is what makes Christ's resurrection utterly unique?
Yeah.
We
That-
weren't, but you can. And although isn't usually the apologetic that it's specifically the Jews didn't?
And they make it seem like they're almost atheists, but they're not. They just don't have a. They just don't
No,
think
no, they say that they absolutely make a blanket statement that it's nowhere to be found in
That's
the
true.
ancient world, and it's utterly false. I mean, I can tell you just a few examples here. The gravitas, the weight of Heracles is felt when he arrives upon Mount Olympus, where he also marries and procreates. Asclepius appears in full bodily presence, not as a mere phantom per Celsus. Romulus appears to Proculus Julius more than human and finely dressed in shining armor. This apologetic that you hear from Christian scholars so often that you don't find bodily immortalization or resurrection in the ancient world anywhere other than the resurrection of Jesus is false. It's not true.
This might be a sign of the evolving apologetic, because I've certainly heard, just like, you used to hear people say that the apostles all died for their beliefs. Now they're saying they're willing to die. That's an evolution of the apologetic. Maybe, Derek, what you're referring to, because I've been in the last 4 or 5 years at least, I've heard them specifically say, well, Hebrews didn't believe in bodily resurrection as opposed to the ancient world. And it's probably in response to what you just said.
Probably. And I think Egypt there's some examples of bodily resurrection happening with Osiris, or maybe not Osiris, but I think. I'm not sure. I'm just throwing it out there.
Oh, absolutely with Osiris.
Well,
it's absolutely bodily.
But to your point, Paulogia, that they talk about the Sadducees being, they're Torah Orthodox Sadducees who don't believe in a bodily resurrection, and there's nothing special happening. Jesus gives us the bodily resurrection. It's better, like whatever.
And everyone on the panel can just call me Paul, because that's weird. So,
All right, gotcha.
Dr. Paul? Alan Bird, thank you for the super chat. The most damning thing about 1 Corinthians 15 is when Paul says, "And last of all, he appeared to me."
How is that damning? I'm curious, Alan, what Alan meant by that, or do you guys know?
Don't know. I can't read into Alan's thinking on that one, but I don't know. I always read that account because right before that, or right after that, let me pull up 1 Corinthians 15, because this is what really made me red flag. I asked this the other day, and I can't remember which scholar, because I'm always interviewing somebody. And I was reading this, and then he appeared to more than 500, and then he appeared to James, and then all the apostles. List of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me. For I am the least of the apostles, unworthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace toward me was not in vain. On the contrary, this is one of those flex moments, I think, where he says, I worked harder than any of them, though it was not I, but the grace of God that is with me. Whether then it was I or they, so we preach, and so you believed. I'm still not closed off to this creed being later. I'm really not.
Define later.
Like, not written by Paul. So anytime after Paul, I'm open to this.
You think this section of 1 Corinthians 15 might have been added later?
I'm saying it's very possible. I'm not closed off to the idea.
Okay.
Because he appears to 500 and none of the Gospels mention this. What the heck is going on with that? Wouldn't you think that the Gospels would have said, hey, by the way, make sure he shows up to 500? And I've asked about the whole
the Pentecost thing.
Pentecost. I've already asked multiple academics, and they say no. That's just a reach.
Sure.
James Tabor says that all the time. He's like, no, it's not Pentecost. Trust me. So I mean, I don't know. I'm not a Greek guy. I'm just relaying what I'm listening to the critical scholars. But why is it not in the Gospels?
Well, I mean, always one thought in my head has been that was kind of almost a debunked part of the story, but because if indeed that was a creed from late 30s, early 40s.
Mm-hmm.
By the time the Gospels are being written in 60s or late 60s, 70s, that by then the 500 wasn't as widely held. Like it just because it wasn't necessarily holding up to the scrutiny.
Because then it would make no sense. They'd be like, well, why didn't everyone know about it?
Anyway, that's nothing but speculation.
And I'm speculating too.
So
I'm speculating too.
That's what we're doing here. Like we're not, we're just.
Well, it's all you can do. Anyone who tells you your soul's dangling on a string over a volcano pit, come on.
But the argument from Silence on the 500, I don't think is a great argument that it's false necessarily. No. But
I just don't. It is a good question to ask. Even Bart Ehrman. Sure. Bart Ehrman said that in the debate with Licona. He was like, why don't the Gospels mention this? And then he just moves on, and I'm like, ooh, I wish he spent some time on that, but
right.
Indo, thank you for the super chat. What info do we have on the disciples post Jesus' death? I heard we can only confirm Paul, Peter, and James. Why is that? What about the others? Paul, I think this is you, man. This is right in your territory.
Man, I'm just chatting all day. I mean, if the question, you may have heard that from me, because that is certainly something I espouse. That was one of the things that really had my faith crumble, was I was going to go and show that all 12 went and did things. And I've kind of moved past the fact that we don't know how they died. We don't know what their circumstances was. I'm now of the belief we don't even know that most of the 12 went out and preached. Like, I don't even know that they were out willing to die. For all we know, Bartholomew and Matthew and a lot of those guys, they went back to fishing, for all we know. Right? Because there's the traditions, the same traditions that we say, that's not really great evidence that they died as a martyr, is really the only traditions we have that they even preached. So, per the question, though, why is that? I think because they didn't go out. I don't think, whether you think a mythicist position that the disciples may have been made up as well, or whether the fact that they just scattered and were lost to history. If they were lost to history, that's why we don't have a good evidence for them.
On top of that, some of the deaths don't add up. Like in Josephus, James dies one way, and then in Eusebius, he dies another way. So it's like, how did he die? Why are they not? How is that not a clear story being passed down if it's such a big martyrdom? You're muted, Derek. Oh, he's on the phone. Oh, okay.
On the phone.
I didn't see the phone.
Yeah, no worries.
But just to continue on what I was saying, James's death is not clear because you have two different accounts of his death. Eusebius is telling us stories that you don't even know where he's getting it from. He's just making stuff up. He's saying Peter was hanging out in Alexandria with Philo. That Peter and Philo were friends. Like, what? When? Where is he getting this from? I don't know. And then if you look at other stuff, Eusebius, I think it's clear Eusebius is just making shit up.
Oh, I think so. And actually, it's funny because even John McDowell's massive book on the death of the martyrs kind of acknowledges in general that, we should probably... No, actually, sorry. I think I'm speaking of Mike Licona.
Yeah. Okay, sure.
That we should be taking the earlier account is and the less elaborate account is the Josephus account. And that probably has the most kernels of the historical truth. Because, again, Eusebius, not only did they stone him to death, they first threw him off a cliff. It's like, well, really? You threw him off a cliff and then he didn't die, so when they had to stone him, it's like, well...
there's an interesting... we lost Derek again. There's an interesting part that Dr. Tabor... I have him on the phone, by the way. Say hey, Dr. Tabor.
Hello there, Derek.
So I had to call him because our next super chat is going to reference something here. But as far as the idea of them disciples, they go back fishing after a couple weeks. Which source is that, Dr. Tabor? Where it's like, or they hid for weeks. I can't remember which one it was.
I think you're thinking of the Gospel of Peter.
Okay.
Which was found in the late 19th century in fragmentary form, and unfortunately, it breaks off at the end. But the last line says that it's written by Peter. Supposedly, it's pseudepigraphal. In other words, we don't think Peter wrote it. But in the last line, it says, "We wept and mourned for I think it says 8 days. It's either 7 or 8 days after the Passover and the crucifixion, which would be the days of unleavened bread. So
Right.
Passover is one night, and the next morning is the first day of unleavened bread, and you do it for 7 days. So altogether, from the 14th of Nisan to the 21st, they're weeping and crying. And then Peter says, I'm going to go back to Galilee and go fishing. So essentially what that's reflecting is the same as the Markan tradition. And to some degree, Matthew, although he puts in one appearance to Mary Magdalene. But other than that, the instructions that are given in Mark by a young man, not an angel, are he's risen. You will see him in Galilee as he said, which I take to refer to an ascent to heaven, a kind of glorious ascent to heaven, similar to what Paul says he saw, kind of a light or a
Right.
voice. And he said, I can't tell you what kind of a body it was. So we have two traditions. We have a late tradition. That would be Luke and John 20. Notice I said John 20, not John 21.
Right.
And that's the tradition that everybody's in Jerusalem. And in fact, in Luke, they're even told by Jesus, don't leave the city until Shavuot, which is Pentecost, Acts 2. So they don't go to Galilee. I mean, if they disobeyed Jesus, I guess you could run them up there. But basically, they don't leave. He says, do not leave until you... So Luke is going strong and hard against the other tradition that it's a Galilee appearance. He wants to make it in Judea, so he has, and John 20 the same way. So you got doubting Thomas, got Jesus appearing through locked doors, people touching his wounds, eating with him. But John 20 knows something of the Peter tradition. It's different because he has Jesus cooking fish on the shore. But Peter says the same thing. I'm going fishing.
Real quick.
John,
I've got another super chat here. I'm sorry. I only have Paulogia. He's on the channel here for a very little bit of time. So Averos has a super chat and he says, can you give direct reference to teacher of righteousness coming back? What document is it mentioned in? And please discuss Marcion underlying Luke. So
you got the basic idea on the Luke. There's two traditions, Galilee appearances and Judean appearances, and the Judean are very late, and the Galilean are early, and I think they're visionary up in the Galilee. Anyway, on the teacher of righteousness, you go basically to the Habakkuk Escher, and there you have he's called one to whom God reveals all the mysteries. He should be called not the teacher of righteousness, but the right teacher, the true teacher is a better translation, according to John Reeves. He wrote a whole article on this. The true teacher, and he's like Moses, but he does die, and from the day of his gathering, we're told there will be 40 years. But once that passed and the end didn't come, they just did not set any more dates. They said, well, we don't know when it's coming, but it's still coming. So we don't know how long they prolonged that. But as far as him coming back, that would be hinted at, not directly stated, in the Thanksgiving hymns, and it would be particularly hymns 11 through 17, which we call the teacher hymns, where he talks about being the suffering servant and being persecuted and even betrayed by his counsel. But then he says, God will raise me up and so forth. And we have a final hymn in the Thanksgiving hymns that's a new one that's just now out, where he's celebrating his ascent to heaven. He's saying, there's nobody like me. I sit at the right hand of God. All the Elohim are jealous of me. No one has my wisdom. So he's claiming to be the ultimate, almost revelatory figure.
This guy sounds super humble. Dr. Tabor, thank you so much for taking my call. Yes.
We could do a show on it sometime.
We do need to do a show. I was just bragging about your book. I love you. Thank you.
And I want to talk to your other chat guy that you mentioned, because he left a nice comment on my on that video we did on Paul's Ascent to Paradise. So we should do that more in depth.
Okay.
I think he's right in his comment. There's a whole lot in there, and we only took 7 minutes to give a brief place. So
thank you, Dr.
let him
Table.
know that it, and he could come on with us, and we could all talk. It would be great.
Cool. Sounds good.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. It's super awesome to be able to have
That's amazing.
academics to, yeah, man. That's there's awesome. As far as Marcion underlying Luke, I have no clue. I'm not the guy on this. I go to the scholars on this one to find out. But thank you, Avaros, for that super chat. I'm gonna try and speed through this because we only have 5-10 minutes with Paulogia.
Yeah, we can finish super chats for sure.
Okay.
I also wanted to clarify because I forgot a reference before, and I hate when I do that. So 2 Corinthians 5:8 is the absent from the body, present with the Lord. In case anyone cares about that. Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes it a little different on how a lot of people interpret that the idea. All right, moving you back to the spot here. Derek's internet's cursed. JK, what do you think of Habermas' alleged 5,000-page book proving the resurrection with new facts and logic?
I'll say something real quick. The most hilarious thing I've ever watched was capturing. Is it capturing Christianity? Is that what it's called? The channel.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
He said I got new evidence about the resurrection, and then as soon as the video started, he said, "Well, it's maybe not new, but this is a different order that I'm going to tell you, and it's gonna." And the look on his face was just like, "Oh my god!"
I love that stream because Gary sprung that on Cameron. He didn't want to tell him in advance what it was going to be. So he'd been hyping it up as new evidence. Yeah. Anyway.
What do you think about his 5,000? Do you have an opinion?
Well, I mean, we now have some new clarification of how it's going to be. So there's the first 1,500 is going to be 1,500 pages is going to be volume 1. And that's what's currently being edited. So it's going to take 2 years it's an external editor, is my understanding, doing the editing. So in 2 years, that first 1,500 pages will come out on just the evidence. That'll be the evidence. And volume 2 is going to be the rest, or part of the rest of it, which will be natural hypotheses. And I'm also guessing that those are not going to be the natural hypotheses that I would put forth or that Bart put forth in the last debate. I'm guessing it's going to be swoon theory and stolen body theory, like the stuff that we've talked about before. Like I'm dubious.
Mm-hmm. Do you think he's going to accurately represent the natural hypotheses that he even mentions too, or do you think if you dig into that, you'll probably find some?
Well, it depends on what you mean. Like I guarantee, I would not be surprised if he found someone who put forth the version that he's going to dispute.
Okay. The
question is that the best version, right? It's kind of like when I am talking about Ken Ham's interpretation of Genesis, that is absolutely a interpretation of Genesis that's out there. Is it the most sophisticated and the best? Probably not. But I'm guessing that's what Gary's will be doing, right? He'll find some.
Yeah. You know, I was just thinking, the more and more I think about it, the more I think about it, the more I don't understand, or the more I think that it's unlikely that there was a tomb at all. And one is based off talking to Bart Ehrman, saying he went through every single Greek manuscript, known Latin and Greek manuscript that he can possibly find, and he hasn't found one example of somebody going from the cross to a tomb. Zero. Zilch. Not only that, Jesus doesn't live in Jerusalem. He's from the north. He's a criminal getting executed. Why would they just have a tomb laying around? A tomb is something that's for like someone who's rich or like royal. You know, everyone else is just getting thrown into a ditch unless you have money. And he's a criminal on top of it from another city. So it doesn't make sense that there was a tomb at all. Even
when I talked to Dale Allison Jr., who thinks there was a tomb, he's not so dogmatic like Mike Licona and others who kind of like are like, no, it was a tomb, you know. He'll say stuff like, when I asked him this very question, he said, well, it could have been just a burial. It could have been just some burial. Paul, when he says he was buried and resurrected, could have been just a burial. It didn't have to be a tomb.
Sure.
The Gospels, obviously, Mark and such, do harp on a tomb. I did ask Robin Faith Walsh, who's another academic who's like, she's like kind of a classicist and New Testament scholar. And I asked her in a text message, is there any contemporary writings in the Greco-Roman world where a man who ends up with an apotheosis or something, or someone dies and they're buried in a tomb cave-like structure and it goes missing, the body goes missing and stuff? So she said, let me get back to you on this. And she's busy, whatever. But I wonder if there's something like that around. Might fit why Mark came up with this whole notion of a tomb narrative. I don't know. Moving on. Indo, did Paul's sacrifice encourage sacrifice? In Acts 21:26, that's where James, I think, was like, hey, we know you're teaching, supposedly you're teaching Jews not to keep the law anymore. Wasn't Jesus supposed to be the final sacrifice? Paul seems to still revere the Mosaic Law here. I think that's the place, right? Isn't that in Acts 21:26 where...
Yeah, it's a good question, I guess.
Where Paul like gets brought to the table and James is going, now there's some rumors, Paul, that you're telling Jews not to even keep the Torah anymore, but we know that's not true. Make sure you know.
No, that's a good point. Oh, doesn't he say something about eating idols that are sacrificed to pagan gods or something? That Paul's basically like, just don't ask, don't tell type of deal.
It wasn't don't ask, don't tell. It was like food to idols. It was like, we all know that that's stupid,
right?
But some other Christians don't, and it hurts their conscience.
Sure.
So for the sake of them, maybe abstain.
I got you. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's okay with it though.
Right.
He's okay with it. And of course, I think most of us on the panel would probably agree that Acts is largely an attempt to harmonize what Paul was preaching with whatever else other people were preaching, right? So the fact that there's going to be some inconsistencies here in Acts 21 doesn't surprise me per se, because it's supposed to be harmonization. But Paul also in his own letters, he's like, he for himself never let himself give up the Mosaic Law, right? Like he was, I am the best Jew that's ever been a Jew.
Like the guy that we just heard about in this Habakkuk pressure, talking about the angels are jealous about me. I mean,
right.
I'm seated on the throne, baby.
Right. So Paul never gave it up for himself. He basically allowed other people to not do it, but for his own. I think that that was his upbringing, right?
Yeah.
So, I've lost the thread of the question, but I think.
No. Yeah.
Next one is festering boils. Any possibility that Paul knew of an earthly Jesus, but Paul was describing the version of the heavenly Jesus in his epistles? Who wants to take the first stab?
I mean, yeah.
Eric does. Or go ahead.
Romans 1:3. He says, I was just talking about this with a godless engineer, and he just doesn't think that. Thinks he knows. I think he thinks he's an expert at Greek. I don't know, but it says straight out that born of a seed of the flesh, according to the flesh. I'm sorry, I couldn't say that right. I mean, I'll pull it up to be more exact, but you guys know what I'm saying.
I think.
Go ahead, Derek.
I think the question's good. I mean, any possibility that Paul knew of an earthly Jesus? Knew of? Sure. I mean, if he's persecuting Christians who once had a teacher, like what we just read about the Habakkuk pressure, and he's dead. They did not believe when they died. They just remained simple mortal nobodies. No, they were probably deified, ascend on high, become like the angels or above the angels, like what we're reading here with this other teacher. Are we then going to say that teacher didn't exist, or he's only a heavenly figure because he's sitting on a throne in the Habakkuk pressure? Or is Enoch, where do we draw the line in terms of like the reality here? And I think no reason to say there wasn't a guy who was seen as a great teacher. That I understand the other side. I came from it, but
descended from David according to the flesh.
But is this question, sorry, do need to step in here there. Is the question trying to say that can both be true at the same time? That he both saw Jesus as a heavenly figure, but also was aware of a historical Jesus? Like, is that asking
pre-existing Jesus?
Oh, is it saying pre-existing? I didn't see pre-existing.
Is that what you're getting at, Paul?
Yeah.
If they said it like that, then I would, yeah.
I guess I was just trying to interpret the question.
Sure, yeah. I would say that.
Because I think we would all agree that Paul, it's possible to harmonize Paul saying this, everything he experienced was a vision without denying a historical Jesus. I think that is a tenable position.
I think Derek, you froze again, bro.
He's having a rough go.
Derek, what do you think about my Derek? I'm just kidding with you. No, yeah, I think I'm with you on that one. I think we're on the same page. Like, I don't see any reason to doubt that at all. Joshua Owens, 1976 interview with John Cleese. Look up YouTube.
I will. I 100% will now. Cool.
Who is that?
John Cleese is a member of Monty Python.
Ah.
So I'm assuming that is telling me that there is an interview talking about some of the how the story of Life of Brian came to be. I'm guessing that that's what the super chat's doing. Try to keep it to $2.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Joshua, letting us know. Doc Pluralmanaut's back. Problem with inference to best explanation is the best of a bad lot problem. If the list of hypotheses does not include the true one, determining the best cannot reveal the truth. Abduction is needed. I'm telling you, Doc.
Doc goes too deep for me sometimes.
He goes like, dude's a heavy hitter.
I don't even know what he just said.
Well,
he's too smart for me.
Part of it is, of course, there's the objection of the whole just epistemology of going for the best explanation that we know of, and saying that that's the true one. Even though, of course, sometimes we do that in science. The thing that has the best predictive power for now is what wins.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to have a falsifiable premise, because God is an excellent explanation for anything, right? Like if tomorrow dolphins started roaming around on land chatting with us, God is a great explanation for that.
Yeah.
God is a great explanation for anything we come across. But
right.
It's not a falsifiable one. So
yeah.
I don't know why I talked about dolphins. That was dumb. Cut that
out. Oh, Derek, you've been I feel like you've been raptured multiple times during this episode.
Yeah, I do a lot of quantum tunneling. In August, I will have been 4 years sober, right? But as they say, you drop one bad habit, you tend to pick up another. So I tend to tunnel through various vacuums and dimensions of space, and it's a bad. I need to knock it off.
Yeah, you do. I'm kind of sick and tired of it. Yeah. Averos, thank you again for the super chat. Tertullian says that the story of post-resurrection fish eating was mentioned in the Gospel of the Lord, or in Gospel of the Lord. What this means is that Jesus resurrected, had a heavenly body, and gods could eat earthly food, unlike apparitions from Sheol.
Wow.
I mean, it could be. When I read Paul, I don't see a physical flesh and bone Jesus. It doesn't mean that they don't believe that some platonic other existence on a divine plane has some type of substance to it. But it's not flesh and blood. Fill my holes in my hands, check out my side. And I don't think Paul thinks Jesus is eating fish. That's a gospel thing, I think, that's trying to correct docetism. I personally think docetism. I could be wrong. That's just my thoughts. It seems contradictory, especially when he says, see me, feel me, know that I have flesh and blood, or bone. I'm flesh and bone. That seems contradictory to Paul, in my opinion. Bradford Baldwin, hi panel. Can you please call him Paulogia, the former Christian who talks about the claims of Christians? Show some respect.
Too long a handle, man.
It's a badass handle, though, I have to admit. Who talks about the claims of Christians? You don't even grant the beyond the claims.
It is a good intro. I like it.
While we're on Paulogia and you came as a guest, I mean, the other guys I can hit up anytime, and I don't often interview with you. What's up with the new channel? If you don't mind plugging that for everybody.
The new channel is my endeavor to put out more content than I do, and there's only for anyone who puts out scripted content or animated content, there's only there's only so much of that you can put out at a time, but there's a lot of stuff I'd love to address that maybe doesn't need that full treatment. So, and I've also wanted to have more conversations with theists and do more like what you do, Derek, which is like talk to scholars and talk to other people who have interesting ideas and bounce around with them. And that's tough to do in the cartoon format.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to become more comfortable being on camera, which is really what, one of the reasons I'm saying yes to you whenever you, all right, because it's giving me practice to being on camera. Anyway, so on that, it's a little less effort because of all the other stuff. But I'm addressing some of the things that can be done more quickly. And I would encourage, I'd love check it out. If these kind of live stream things are your jam, that's what I'm doing over at Paulogia Live. So you can search for that.
I'm a member, by the way.
Appreciate. And
Nice.
that's actually the fun thing, is because being a member on my other channel does next to nothing because I don't really do anything. So the fun avatars and things, you can be a member on Paulogia Live.
I just like to support,
Appreciate.
I really like your show.
Thanks.
Yeah, man. I think it's well needed. The editing you do on your the big channel, gosh. I mean, it's just, I know that 24, 48 hours of consistent work on one video.
Yeah,
I can tell.
I'm pumping out a video a day, which I even feel like I'm overworking myself sometimes, which is why I take weekends off now.
Right.
But
that's good.
Yeah, I'm taking weekends off now, man.
Yeah.
But your name is Paulogia, the former Christian who talks about the claims of Christians. In case
the claims of Christians.
Did you want to add anything?
I was going to say was, for example, I've invited Testify to be on my channel. I forget, is Eric something?
I heard of that. Testifies.
Well, he is a Christian who thinks that the minimal facts argument is stupid.
We need more of those.
Right, and so he and I are going to talk about why minimal facts is stupid, and it'll be great.
I think minimal facts to explain anything is stupid. Just to think about it, just the concept just is insane.
Well,
just being stupid.
Imagine like I don't know. I'll just pick sports. The Super Bowl. Imagine the analyst is like, I'm just going to give you the minimal facts of this game. Well, they threw a ball 3 times and this team won. That's it. That's all you need to know.
I feel like it must have come from law, because that, of course, there's a few things you can in law. Sometimes we can establish like 2 or 3 things for sure, and generally, both sides will stipulate to certain facts so that they're not fighting about that. Yeah. And then in those cases, when there's stipulation of facts, then the argument becomes who can best explain it. I'm guessing that's where Gary and those guys got it from, was from a legal perspective.
It's a very defensive argument.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Moving on to Gray's 174. How many messianic attempts were there shortly before Jesus? Could it be that Jesus was just the one that happened to check off enough boxes? I think so.
You got Judas of Galilee, I think it is, Simon of Perea. But then there's also like in Judas Maccabees is considered to be the savior of Israel, and like then you have the I don't know, Cyrus is called the Messiah, Lord's anointed one. I don't know, it depends on how you define messianic attempt, I guess. But I guess in the sense like Jesus would be, I can think of 2: Simon of Perea, Judas of Galilee. Other than that, there's probably a whole bunch that I'm just thinking of 2 though. And
I'm not completely convinced of the check the most boxes thing, because I think the people who followed Jesus created new boxes for him to check off.
Point.
If you ask, an Orthodox Jew today, they don't think Jesus checked off any boxes at all.
Yeah, you're right. He didn't unite the tribes. That's the biggest one of all.
Right.
The Messiah is supposed to unite the 12 tribes. That didn't happen. He's supposed to usher in the world to come. And by the way, Elijah's supposed to be back to bring the Messiah. So they just kind of move around that by saying, "Oh, John the Baptist was Elijah." It's like,
and judging the nations. That never happened. Rome kicked their butt. I mean, what do you do? There's a lot of problems, but I think you're right. Oh, go ahead.
It will happen when he gets back. If you just give him a minute. Can you give him a minute?
Dude, you're back from Astro plane, like whatever. Jeez.
You got a kitty.
Gray's 174 says, were the ex-Christians on this panel anti-gay? Yes, I was. I was taught and raised that way, So as far as like, that's the way I always, viewed the world as a Christian. you get out of that bubble and you start to look at nature, you start to realize, like, hold on, am I anti-nature too? Is it the animal kingdom got screwed up when they ate the fruit? What happened here? You know,
I can honestly say that I was never anti-gay, but I will say when I was in the fundamentalist circles, I would be quiet against. I wouldn't stand up for it. So that kind of makes me by default in the wrong. But
well, what is meant by anti-gay here? You know what I mean? Like, what is meant by this?
Yeah, good question. Yeah,
I thought, well, I mean, I thought it was a sin, but
Right.
I thought I was very adamant that it was no different than the sin of stealing something or like, I didn't think that homosexual relationships were any more sinful than out of wedlock relationships, right? Like, I just put that all in the same category.
I have to admit, I put it above. It was worse in my little fundamentalist nut job head of mine, honestly, because I equated this sin in Romans 1 with what goes on in this list after he describes man with man, woman with woman, and then it's like murderers and this and that, and it's like, whoa, this is bigger than stealing an apple from the local store, you know, or cheating on your girlfriend or whatever. Like,
well, but adulterers is in that list, and so like that's my justification for me.
Yeah.
That it was on par with, you know, you're shacked up with your girlfriend or you're gay, and those are the same.
That's the problem. I ignored any, like, it was, I don't know, it was a bad, you know, you cherry pick, and that's what it looked like.
And yeah, it's an excellent question.
Yeah, it is. Caleb Jackson, what's the most interesting miracle, supernatural anomaly claim in history outside of Christianity? And that's our buddy Caleb. Derek, he wants you to tell us.
I got one.
What is your most interesting?
I think that okay, so I like to bring this up, that Tacitus and Suetonius, and I think Plutarch, I think it's 3 accounts, but I know for sure it's 2, that say that Vespasian was healing the blind people in two locations, Egypt and in Samaria. And so I always say, well, we have all these accounts that say the same thing. Why do people believe that? There could, you know, obviously didn't happen, but I like to bring that point up because it's like, what if you're going to go off? Oh, well, we have multiple accounts saying the same thing, and that makes it true. Then why isn't Vespasian's thing true, right? And they will. I usually don't get a straight answer on that.
Because it's not the Gospels, dude.
Right. Obviously.
What do you think, Derek? Can you think of one?
Yeah, you know, to me, it's only interesting in terms of, you know, religious and legendary phenomena, but it's not really intriguing unless there's some good evidence for it. And the only thing that comes to mind for me at this moment is the sightings of these unidentified aerial phenomena. That's not miraculous per se, but certainly anomalous. I do find that interesting because we've actually got evidence, some of which we've seen. Now, what do we make of that? Is it extraterrestrials, or is that pretty far-fetched? If it's not that, what is it? That to me is incredibly interesting, and I don't know what to make of it. But I'm sure we could talk all day about something like that. But yeah.
Paul, you got anything?
Well, I would say just the general category of anything that they discuss on Coast to Coast AM. You know, be it remote viewings or Hollow Earth or lizard people or like all those, anything that that would be like X-Files level type stuff. Like some of the stuff that X-Files are based on. I find those, like I as a Christian, I found them compelling because it kind of affirmed multiple levels. But then a lot of them, there's some kernel of something to a lot of the things. So I don't find them to be compelling, but I find them interesting.
Alex Jones has some really good stuff.
Yeah. He also brought, thank you, Caleb, for the super chat again, my friend. Also, I'd love to have a discussion with Paul on the resurrection if Derek or Neil sets it up.
I don't know.
So he's a Christian apologist, but I must admit, like, he is not like your typical, what you usually see. Okay. Very mature in comparison. And the guy actually is acquainted with like critical thoughts about the New Testament as well. So like I did a minimal facts, you know, that thing I sent you, the paper.
Mhm.
And then I'm doing one on Paul, and he wrote me back. He's like, I wish you went into the fact that there's guards at the tomb in one of the gospels. He's like bringing up problems as well. Like he can show you things. He has explanations he thinks that better suit the data, but in his view. But yeah, he'd be a fun conversation. Derek, can you vouch for Caleb?
Yeah, I think Caleb is one of the sharper, more well-informed Christian apologists, and he does strive to be as objective as he can, given his beliefs.
Yeah.
Well, I have a couple of Christians lined up, so I'll see how those go. But also, Derek, you set up my girl Shannon with the chat, and I got to see how that goes to see how well I take your recommendation.
Oh, hold up. Hold on. What are you talking about? Is this the Break the Rules channel?
Oh yeah, no, that's going to be interesting.
I'm not recommending anything in that in particular because I don't know where that's going to go. So I mentioned Shannon's name because he was like, what he said is nobody on the left has any answers for anything. And like, they all just like cry and then jump off the show and have nothing to say. And I said, well, you might want to talk to someone who isn't going to cry and just like not have answers. And then I mentioned her name. That's it. Don't put any weight on Derek on this one. Trust me. I just mentioned maybe you should reach out and try and see if she would come on. But as far as Caleb goes, yeah, I vouch. He's very kind. He's not rude. He's very respectful.
Does he have a YouTube channel I can look at?
I've done conversations with him on mine, and he is part of another channel, PORA or something like that. So
all right,
I will. Yeah.
We'll see where it goes.
Okay. Topic discussed. Thanks for the super sticker. Gary in the house and John Gear in the house. What's up? I didn't miss any comments, did I? Derek's going to freeze if we don't hurry up, guys.
Well, I also need to relinquish my internet to Shannon for said conversation soon. So
okay.
Yeah.
Just want to say thank you, Paulogia. You've been instrumental in helping me during my deconstruction the last 3 years. JD Man.
Oh, thank you so much, JD.
And do you guys have Christian friends, family? Yes. If so, are you able to discuss these issues with them openly? Mostly no. Straight up. I think we're all on the same page with that.
Yeah,
Flamio, I'm just flying through them so we can get Paulogia not in trouble here because I know how it is. Genghis Khan was closer to being the Messiah than the sorcerer Jesus. Flamio says. Thank you for the super chat. And then Mama Dog. Thank you for the super sticker. I just wanted to at least get everybody's attention. Now that we're towards the end, may I plug, for everybody's sake, your YouTube channels as we're exiting. Go to Theological. I promise you his videos do not freeze at all. He will not. Oh, I got the super sticker up still. He has some really good videos. Some of my favorite little introductions is the Origins of Yahweh. Really love it. Everything that begins has a cause. Yahweh began, therefore Yahweh had a cause. Go check it out. Gnostic Informant, my buddy Neil. Who the heck is this redneck with a flag and a shotgun? Anyway, Paulogia as well. And thank you for joining us today, Paul. I wanted to just have an open, fun conversation about why we're not Christians anymore. And then he has the live show.
That's right.
And you'll be doing one Thursday as well.
I am. Join me there.
Consider joining the Patreon. Any final words from everybody before the end of the world happens?
You have just attained true gnosis.
Did we have time? Do we have time? Anyone? Just a quick explanation as we're leaving.
I have no idea.
Best explanation for Fatima and the sun? Mass hallucination?
They were sprayed with DMT.
I actually, there's got to be elements of mass delusion, which is something that I know Christians conflate, or apologists ideal conflate delusion and hallucination. Delusion is when you buy into something and believe it, but you didn't necessarily, have external stimuli that gave it to you. You can just be convinced by someone else, and then you can convince yourself that you saw it. I mean, these are things. Delusion is a thing that happens very frequently in groups. So probably something in that camp.
Very interesting. Well put. Any final words from you, Derek or Neil?
I would just say that the actual ontological manifestation of Mary herself is the simplest explanation for that phenomenon. Therefore, it's the true one.
That's right.
Yep.
Anyone who
How it
doubts
works.
that is just purposely trying to suppress the truth and unrighteousness, and we know it.
Yeah,
Uh,
don't be
go
a
subs-
beehole.
Go subscribe to Paulogia Neil and Derek Bennett, and never forget, we are Myth Vision.
Don't any of you have the guts to fight for blood?
I'm your huckleberry. That's just my game.